Yeah,
Yep.
all
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, it was really cool for me to see Patrick's demo because I have like a startup crush on societies. It's like very. I think we've had similar ideas at similar times, I guess. I don't have I don't have a genius on my team, unfortunately, but we're doing our best, you know. What I'm going to talk to you about today is media diets, and I'll explain what that means in a second. But just a little bit on my background. I built a 50-person marketing agency. Like it was one of the first growth hacking agencies back in the day. So of course we all knew about like Growth Tribe, and that was kind of how I heard about this group as well. When I left the agency, I kind of messed around doing courses for a while. I created LinkedIn Learning courses, Udemy. And then last year, I wrote a book on prompt engineering for O'Reilly, published that. And then through the courses and the book, that's like how I had some time to mess around and start my own thing again. This not doing another agency, even though I did do an April Fool's the other day to pretend I was starting another one. This is a SaaS business that I started very, very much in the same kind of domain of synthetic user research. But we've taken a little bit of a different approach to it. Like Patrick said, it's really exploding right now, and there's going to be a lot of different people exploring the space and seeing what UX makes sense, seeing how to make these simulations more accurate and stuff. So yeah, really exciting to see other people looking at it too. So I'll get straight into it. So Rally, I'm not going to do like a product demo necessarily, but I'll just kind of show you basically what it does. And then what I'm going to show you is like an experiment we ran that isn't like baked into the product yet, but something we're thinking about and get your responses. The way we work is it's a bit more like ChatGPT, where you ask a question and except with our system, the prompt goes out to all of the AI personas. So you might have 50 or 100 personas. You can create the audiences in our platform as well, based on a prompt or based on real data. Like if you have user transcripts, etc., you can create personas from that. And then you get individual responses from each persona. So we focus a lot more on rather than necessarily like predicting reach, which I think is also a really good use case. We're focused more on like the qualitative side and like understanding why people like one version versus another. Because coming from my background as someone who used to run a lot of Facebook ads or do a lot of A/B tests for landing pages, that was the hard part, is like understanding like why that version failed, or why that version succeeded. So each persona, you can be relatively light like this one here, or you could be much more detailed with a larger background. This is how you generate the personas right now. So you can put in a description. It works pretty well actually, even if you put in percentages and say like I want it 50% men, 50% women. Does a pretty good job of keeping that accurate. And then you can go in and edit the individual personas as well. So if you already know your customer really well and you want to kind of create these manually, you can do that. You don't necessarily have to use AI to create the audience. And then the really cool feature I think is cloning. So if you have like a user transcript, you've done an interview with 10, 20, 30 of your customers, you can create virtual twins of those people to talk to. So like I did I think it's like 150 user interviews over the past month, and we have like a rally audience of those people that I talked to that I run all my ideas past. And the main kind of vision here was really like I always liked the idea that Jeff Bezos used to talk about, where he said that they would keep like an empty chair in the meeting to symbolize the customer, the voice of the customer. Like they're actually the really important ones that we're working towards here. My thinking with Rally is that like if we can always have that customer involved. It's impractical to have a real customer in the meeting with you, but if every decision is like, hey, let's simulate this and see what our audience thinks. Then you can avoid a lot of costly mistakes, but you can also iterate a lot quicker rather than going out and commissioning a big expensive study or running A/B tests like I used to do. Cool. So that's Rally, but I wanted to talk to you about media diets. It's like a concept I learned about from a paper I read in doing some research for Rally and thought this was kind of crazy, and we ran an experiment with it. Someone asked about politics recently. I thought Patrick had a good answer, but I kind of went the opposite. And as soon as I thought about the political use case, I thought I really want to see if this works, because if it works right now for me, then I'm sure other people are already doing it, right? And I need to defend myself. So I wanted to explore that with you guys and kind of show you what what does work in the space, and like the results were super interesting. So what are media diets? It's from a specific paper, and I was happy to share the presentation afterwards. We wrote a blog post about this as well, where they found that if they trained an LLM on specific articles from, say, like the Wall Street Journal or Fox News, that changed the responses that the LLMs gave, to the point where they could predict public opinion of people who also read those publications. So, you train an LLM on Fox News and it starts to go more right wing. You train an LLM on The Guardian and it starts to go more left wing, right? And that makes sense because they are, trained on human output, and they're kind of, tried to make LLMs relatively down the middle and not down one specific side. But if you fine tune these models, or in our case, if you prompt them with examples, then you really can change the way that they role play, and exploring that can maybe give us a bit of an understanding in how these different media diets or media bubbles might affect real world people as well. So one thing that makes this possible is that GPT-4o still hasn't seen the election, right? So it still thinks Joe Biden is president. And the cutoff date I think is like November, December 2023. So when you ask ChatGPT, by the way, it does know, but that's because it does a web search in the background. And therefore, this is in the OpenAI playground. If you ping the model directly through the API, it doesn't have that information. So we can experiment with how it might vote in the election and run a virtual election for it. And the first thing I did was I just created an AI persona that would vote for Kamala Harris. And this is a very simple experiment. I kept the persona relatively simple as well. And so far so good. That was like pretty straightforward. She gives a reason why she would vote for Kamala. But then I try and make her change sides by feeding her different biased media, right? So, and yeah, don't worry, I do the other way as well in a second. So I just wanted to kind of see how many pieces of media it would take and what types of media would change the LLM's mind. I tried lots of the different things, and as you'd expect, actually, really biased news sources that are like known to be quite biased had much less of an effect. Just anecdotally, I didn't experiment, I didn't run it statistically, but one of the things I found was articles from really reputable sources like the FT were quite a lot more effective. In this case, this was like an article that praised Trump's rollout of Operation Warp Speed, where he rolled out the vaccine during COVID, and did seemed to have done like pretty good job on that. So there was a really good profile in the FT that explained it's like very positive about Trump. And because this persona works in healthcare, like it kind of makes sense that this would be one of the things that convinced her. And you can see at the end here, like they still have reservations about the candidate, but ultimately they voted for Trump in the end. So one thing I found is that going the other way is much easier. Only took 2 pro-Harris media articles to flip a Republican persona. So that was kind of interesting. Even the strongly Republican personas that I tried were like very easily persuaded the other way, which I think shows us a little bit that like these LLMs are poorly calibrated in some areas. They might have biases separate from how humans actually act in the real world. Because obviously, 50% of the country voted for Trump, and the other 50% voted for Harris. So like you wouldn't expect it that to be that easy necessarily. So I wanted to zoom out and kind of see, okay, let's simulate like a wider election and see like what the aggregate impacts of these media diets would be. So I created a simple sample of US personas. I didn't use Rally for this. I just kind of created a simple version in Claude. So this is my prompt you could use if you wanted to replicate this. And I just took US demographic samples, and then I then ran another session, kind of double checked and said, okay, like, do these demographics actually are they actually accurate based on the census? And it did a really good job actually. It was only slightly off in some areas. So I mean, this isn't really scalable. Like, it's not how we do it at Rally, but it was like good enough for this experiment. So the interesting thing is that the baseline voting outcomes, so 75% of them voted Democrat without any kind of media diet. So um, I think there have been some studies that say that LLMs are more biased to the left. I think Sam Altman has said that they're going to like fix that or something. But I mean, I don't want to wade into the political discussions. But it makes sense, they've been trained on the media, and there's like a lot of negative media out there. It makes sense that they would have that opinion as a baseline. But it does kind of show that it is really important to not just use the LLM without any calibration against your real world data, because they might have biases that aren't necessarily representative of real people. I think we did the same thing in the UK. You might find it was like biased against like the Conservatives or something, based on all the bad press they've gotten. Yeah, really interesting to see that. The way that I checked that, by the way, was when I generated the personas, I created a political leaning and I asked it to be representative, and it made 42% of them Republican. But then I hid that from the prompt. So when I prompted the persona, I didn't tell them that they were a Republican, right? I didn't tell them that they were a Democrat. And so that's kind of how I established what the baseline should have been. So I worked on calibration. I worked on trying to improve the performance and get it a bit more calibrated and more realistic. So there's like a multi-stage prompt. This was from a scientific paper where they predicted Trump's victory before the election using LLM personas, which is really interesting. That was like why I focused on politics specifically for this one, because I saw the media diets paper and I saw this, and I thought, okay, this is super interesting. And it's I'm no like aspiring Nate Silver. Like, I don't really care about predicting elections, but I just thought it'd be a good experiment where we could learn a bit more about calibration. So one of the things that really helped is priming the persona with their existing political leanings. So telling them, that they like the first they ask, what would you describe yourself as before you introduce the candidates? Because I think that's really important. Most people do eventually vote with their party in the general election, even if like in the primaries they don't, they're like heavily skewed towards one candidate or another. And then I provide them with a brief description of the candidates' policies. I just took those descriptions directly from the paper, and then gave them information on the candidates' biographical backgrounds as well. I think this is really important. Even when you're working with celebrities, the candidates are well known already because Kamala was, VP at this time. I still think it's really important to ground the LLM in like, what is some information that it might not have, and I think the way that you word that information is also super important. Like, if you change the biographical background, it really affects the results. And if you change the candidate's policies description, that really changes the results as well. So that's something I've seen a lot. And then here's like the overall prompt if you want to like try something like this. I had the persona, and then I had the policies, and then the profiles. Then I did the priming. And I just put this into the prompt, actually, into the messages as like a user and assistant message. And so I gave them the political leaning they already had, and then I fed them the media after that. And then I specifically said, like, how do you feel about the candidates, to get the thinking response, and then I used a tool call or a function calling to get the vote at the end. So that's kind of like forcing them to take an action, because I found that you can get them to think pretty easily, and they'll tell you roughly like what they think about different candidates, and you can see. I think that's really important to diagnose like whether the media had an impact or not. You can see some of the same things talked about in the media diet down later on downstream in the thinking. So that was kind of like how I was checking whether the media was swaying their vote. But it is really important to tally at the end, like what were the actual votes. Cool. So here's what I talked about like downstream kind of understanding of the media's effect on the internal thinking. When I fed different different information into the personas, it really changed this section, like their thinking section. They would mention different topics that were in the media. Um, so uh, like it would really make a big difference to like the experimental design, to be able to see the thoughts specifically and not just kind of measure the impact or the action. It also gave me some ideas of like what other media to try to that might be more or less effective. Then I kind of scaled it up a little bit. I needed more I needed more media links to send to them. So, and I didn't. It's pretty hard to find articles that didn't that like aren't like they're actually from before the election and haven't been updated. So I used deep research to do this. It was pretty good. I just went through each one of these one by one. So I asked it to find 10 like pro-Trump and anti-Kamala articles, and then 10 pro-Kamala and anti-Trump articles, and then I ran the experiment. So like here's an example of the pro-right media. It's like some of it was like Kamala Harris is an idiot from the National Review, but then some of it was like a bit more highbrow, like like Financial Times example that I talked about. So yeah, that was the type of stuff that I was feeding it. And then for pro left, it was this sort of thing. So like some stuff like Trump is a threat to democracy, right, which is like a common narrative. But then there are other things like like a bit more of like a like this is why we're endorsing Kamala, for example. So I tried to get a real mix of types of media, if that makes sense, just to kind of make it more of a fair trial. I tested that same persona again. So if we look like before the media diet, she was saying that she cared about Kamala's focus on healthcare and clean energy investment, and she, thought a bit about immigration enforcement, energy independence, national security from Donald Trump. So she kind of had like she voted Democrat, but she had a relatively biased view. And then if you look, she went from so like it was Democrat every single time I ran it, and then she shifted to no preference. So we kind of shifted it off of the left but into the center, if that makes sense, with that media diet. She still talked about healthcare. But yeah, it was, it said, however, his approach can be divisive. I'm concerned about his past behavior. Now the interesting thing is that she started in the thinking, she started talking about Kamala being vague and lacking substance, which is something that a lot of the media posts talked about as like a criticism. So you could see that it really made a difference to the vote. And here's the final result of the experiment that I ran. So if you well calibrate the models, then you still get a slight kind of focus on the Democratic Party. It was 58% popular vote, which I think is like in line with what people were expecting maybe before the election, and 33% Republican, 9% no preference. And then if you feed them a pro-Trump media diet, then the Republicans win the popular vote by a little bit, right? So kind of interesting to see that, like based on what people expected to happen in the election. And then the other thing I've kind of found was interesting was, like I said, it was much easier to convince the right wing LLMs to switch to the left. So if you fed a pro-Harris media diet, suddenly 97% of people will vote for Harris, which is probably unrealistic unless you know Trump killed someone, or I don't know, even then. So yeah, it did kind of show me that you have to be really careful, like when you're doing an experiment like that, actually like matters to your business day to day, and like you're modeling this against customers, you're going to have similar types of things where it's going to follow some stereotypes more than others. It's going to get some things wrong about how real customers would vote in real life with their wallets. This is just like a very visceral example, but I think it's really, really important to calibrate. And that's like one of the things we try and recommend to people who are using our tool, is to like spend some time on that audience design, like really think about like what personas you're creating, and then test it and see if it matches real world results. And if it doesn't look realistic, then go back and kind of craft those personas a bit more. And I think that that's going to be a real skill, like getting back into like the prompt engineering side of things, like being able to do the right research on your customers and understand who they are, but then also running A/B tests and figuring out, from a calibration point of view, how do you make the model respond with realistic responses? Because then once it can predict past results, then you can rely on it a bit more and be a bit more confident that it will predict future results as well. So one of the things that I've been thinking about, and maybe we can kind of talk a bit about this in the questions, but GPT 4.5 recently like passed the Turing test, and actually this is another paper that you can take a look at. One of the things that got it over the line was giving it a persona. Without a persona, it doesn't pass the Turing test, but then with the prompt that they used, it does. And that means, by the way, if you haven't heard of the Turing test, that it can convince someone or convince people that it is a human when they can't see whether it's an LLM or not. And that kind of got me thinking here that these models are really just getting a lot more accurate over time, getting a lot cheaper to run. GPT 4.5 is very expensive to run. It's like $70 per million tokens, something like that, which is thousands of times more expensive than most LLMs. But you can kind of see where these things are going. Well, not only will we be able to more accurately predict potential responses, but we'll also be able to create more, persuasive narratives, I think. And so that's a thing to, not to like scare everyone, but like that's something I think we need to watch out for, and check your sources and stuff when you see things online that outrage you. Because the media diet that you're feeding yourself can sway your opinion quite a bit. And I think that running experiments like this is super important, because once you understand the mechanisms, you understand like what the trigger points are, you can develop your own counter narratives, and you can maybe be a little bit inoculated from some of the vitriol online. That's going to be really important that people develop a bit of an immune system to these persuasive arguments, one way or the other, because there's going to be a lot of them coming as these tools get developed. With Rally, we're specifically focused on evaluation rather than generation. Like we don't create like new versions for you. But like I think like might be something we explore in the future. I'm not sure, but yeah, I think that these tools are getting better and better at this. And Sam Altman seems to think so. This is like the quote that keeps me up at night. Convinced me over the past year to really focus on synthetic users. He seems to think that in 4 years that 95% of what marketers use agencies for will be easily and instantly done at basically no cost by AI. And this is where he mentioned synthetic customer focus groups. I think where it gets really interesting is in being able to automatically kind of do that iterative self-improving loop where it might be testing thousands and thousands of different messages in the background for you, and then evaluating the responses, and then only kind of telling you when it's come up with a hit campaign. And that's kind of like maybe how I'd expect the agencies of the future to be working, using these synthetic focus groups or synthetic panels. So yeah, really, really interesting, really important, I think, to understand what's coming. But also, I think these tools can be used for good or for bad, depending on who's wielding them. So, it's important for us to understand what we are, what is possible by running these types of experiments. Also, if you wanted to learn a little bit more about that, I have a link to the article here. Just kind of details a bit more what we did, but I'll also share the stuff afterwards. And then if you want to email me, happy to get you past the waitlist and give you access to mess around with Rally. We're a small team. It's just me and one other person, Reese, on the call full time. We have a part-time CTO at the minute. But yeah, we're doing more and more experiments like this, and some of those will make it into the product as well.
Very interesting, Mike. Thanks so much. Kind of my head is spinning now.
Yeah,
Don't know what to
I
believe
realized that I
anymore.
didn't expect it to be that dystopian when I put the presentation together, but hopefully you guys are more optimistic.
So we still have like 10 minutes for questions, if anyone. Then
Yeah.
I'll ask a question. So a lot of these LLMs are trained on written language, and a lot of what defines our relation to the world is our lived experience in a way. So we experience our first breakup, our first rejection, and a lot of these things create emotional resonance to things. They create like this emotional memory in us that then gets activated once we, and our synthetic persona is able to kind of recreate that lived experience, or how do you view it?
Yeah, it's a good question. Like one of the things I've struggled with as someone who was messing around with GPT-3 like in 3 or 4 years ago, and calling myself a prompt engineer since then. I've tried and tried and tried to get it to replicate my writing, and it just still sucks. And I realized that the reason is because it doesn't have a context window as large as my brain, right? Not that I'm particularly smart, but like sometimes I'll write about something that happened to me 20 years ago, and you just can't stuff like 20 years worth of context into Google or OpenAI or whatever. Even if you could, it's actually even a bigger problem again to like understand what part of that context to pay attention to. And I think that generally humans are like better at vibes than LLMs are right now. So I would say that I'm a big believer. This is actually what makes me not a doomer when it comes to AI. Is that I think there's like a computational limit to how much you can do. And I suspect that humans are quite close to that limit through evolution. Like we're probably already about as efficient as you can imagine in terms of like how we convert energy into computation. So I don't actually expect there to be this superhuman AI that can predict your every thought, right? Like I think we're going to be really surprised at what AI can do, but it'll be mostly because we're more predictable than we think we are. So like Patrick was saying, if you actually just know that I'm half American, half English, and if you know like the last three things I read or whatever, like you could probably predict what I'm going to say about 80-90% of the time. And actually there was another paper where they found if you do a 2-hour interview with someone, you can take that transcript and predict with 85% accuracy what they would say on surveys and how they would play in economic games. And the really interesting thing that stood out for me from that paper is that that's also the accuracy that people have when you survey them again. So if you survey me today and then you survey me next month, I'm only going to agree with 85% of what I said last time. And I think that's where we live in that 15%. Like that's the last part. Like maybe we'd get to 90% or something with AIs, but ultimately there is going to be some computational limit or complexity limit where it's just going to be too expensive really to like fit the whole context in and to like search that whole context for the right thing to say.
And you ever
So
rate? Yeah, Mohammed, you
yeah,
first.
yeah, thanks, Paul. So question, Michael. So I love the reference to the brain, regarding the context window. I think as, marketers, we are, the golden rule is kind of, know your customer, right? And that's not just having, some, age and the demographics or whatever, but really understanding what drives someone. I'm in a business where we have 20, 25 clients, and that's our whole business. We don't want more than that. So my whole job is really to, dream of, know what they dream about and what they talk about and what they aspire to do, etc. Would we be able, or to what extent would we be able to replicate that? I understand, giving some context to an LLM, look, this is what you read, you live here, etc. But how far could we go in basically replicating synthetically a person?
Yeah, good question. So I find it almost I find almost it's almost a crime to like not test things with LLMs now because I feel like an idiot if I didn't and then I post something and it goes off and the reason is that it's so quick and cheap to do it that like why wouldn't you do it, right? Like why should like I feel like almost everything you put out in publicly should at least be run past your AI audience first, right? Because you can still ignore it. Like it's not like you can just say no. I think this is an absolute banger. I'm going to post it, right? Like that. And that's the 15% where you live. But like it's genuinely helpful to like when I do it and I go, oh, I didn't know people would get offended by that, or like I ran like when I did this media diet post, I thought that politics is very controversial. People will complain about it one way or another, right? Like so both sides will get triggered. So I like ran that post through Rally a few times until it came out and it said, yeah, the author has maintained like a pretty good balance. So because I didn't want people to be distracted by the political stuff. I wanted them to understand about the meta idea that I was coming up with. So like yeah, if I was you, and especially if my customers are like really important because I've only got 20, 30 of them and I don't want more, then like why wouldn't you have like a sense check before you send something to them? And like one of the things I'm excited about is starting to bake this into different processes so that it happens more automatically. Um, uh, but yeah, like you can avoid a lot of easy to avoid mistakes by doing this. But you can also be positively surprised by things that you maybe had just a little bit of confidence in, and then you see the results from Rally, and you're like, oh wow, like yeah, now I'm like really pumped to put this out because I didn't think that there would be this positive.
Yeah,
So I think
yeah,
it can really increase your conviction in an idea too, especially if you like one team member thinks one thing and another team member thinks another thing. Now we just say like let's simulate it and see who's right. Like
to what
it used to be
extent?
like let's A/B test it in my old agency, but now it's simulation.
To what extent do you think we could simulate a person, right? So that's my question. I understand that it's valuable to do this, but so given my CRM, I've got our conversations,
Mhm.
all the things I've logged in 3 years of collaborating with this customer.
Yeah.
So I can give that all as a context window, right? Or even more than that. We go on to LinkedIn, etc.
Yeah.
So how accurate do you see this, going? Because no matter the accuracy, I mean, just a plain LLM looking at what you're trying to say, just the feedback is valuable. It'll
Mhm.
make you think.
Yeah.
But I'm especially curious into your vision on how accurate we will be able to simulate individual human beings.
I think to put some real tangible numbers on it, I find it's about 50-60% accurate in ChatGPT, right? Like if you just dump in some context and say like this is what I'm trying to ask, like and that's more of like a heuristic. And you can get it to like 80-85% accurate with some calibration and like what we've done with Rally. But I would say even if it was 20% accurate, it's still useful, right? because it's the same thing as like asking another person to check your work before you post it, right? Like you might disagree with what they say, but they might catch something that you're like, oh, didn't realize that I had a spelling mistake there, or like, that they think it's saying one thing. So I'll give you another tangible example. Actually, is the I was asking my AI audience. This is very meta. I built an audience of Rally customers, and then based on call transcripts, and then I was asking them about like how would they think about really ramping up Rally, like doing a lot more a bigger audience, and like some of them started to come back to me and say that they'd be upset about the impact on the environment. And I was like, huh, I didn't even think about that. Like I'm a real AI pro AI guy, but I'm not my customer, right? And that is the narrative in the media right now, that people are worried about the environmental impact of, like every time you ask ChatGPT something, it like uses a gallon of water or whatever it is. So like it's not something I would have ever thought about, because I just don't really like think about those sorts of topics being like very very pro technology. But like as soon as I saw that, I thought, okay, like that is something I might need to address, and I can choose to ignore it and just say, well, people who worry about that aren't my customers, or I could choose to embrace it and say, we're going to be more environmentally friendly, so we're not going to call 5,000 LLMs, we're only going to call 500 or whatever. So like it just gives you that map of the territory that you can then choose where you want to go on that map.
I have a question.
Feel free to.
So I'm wondering how you're going to take this further in terms of simulation. Like if the LLM can mimic consumer behavior, can they mimic the behavior of entities and organizations? So if we do deep research on our competitors and provide all the LLM with the sufficient information, can they start simulating their behavior and do some game theory or deploy some strategic decision and see how they react? And I'm wondering if you played around with that idea.
I would say that as soon as you get into agents, it becomes incredibly unreliable right now with the current crop of models. So like I've tried all the demos of computer use and stuff, and I still find that like they get really lost and it takes a long time. Like one really fun one to look at is Claude Plays Pokemon. It's like a Twitch stream where they've set Claude 3.7 up to play Pokemon. And it's a really great test of the model, because you can see what it gets stuck on, and I think it got stuck for like couple of days in one level, and that's something like a 10-year-old would be able to do, right? In some respects, I would say like AI agents are not really working right now. Like you couldn't just deploy a bunch of agents in a town, or or like a virtual town, or you couldn't just like spin up like a virtual company and expect it to be coherent in any way. But part of the reason why I'm working on this now is that I realized that you kind of have to think a couple of years out, because by the time the models are available and they and they are good enough to be able to not get stuck, then if you already have the customer base, you already have the brand and the infrastructure, and you've already been learning about the pitfalls of this industry, then you can just drop that model in and say, okay, now it's ready. So that's the way I think about it. Like I definitely don't want to pretend that this is like possible today, without a lot of hard work and a bigger team, but I'm very excited about it being possible one day.
Yeah, this is super exciting. And another thing is that, well, if it can mimic consumer behavior, they can potentially mimic employees' behavior, right? So if we input our internal employees, their personality traits, we can then simulate a change of policy or a change of structure within the organization before announcing it. And I think that
exactly.
is another use case.
Like I did. I think Patrick, you wanted to speak as well, but like I studied economics. I did a master's in that. So like I was like the very first thing I thought of. Like you can do these behavioral experiments, or you could even like at a government level, you could say like, okay, what would be the impact of tariffs at 100% or tariffs at 50%. It would have been great for the world if like we knew those answers ahead of time instead of like figuring them out on the fly. Yeah. Yeah, Patrick, did you want to?
Yeah, I kind of wanted to ask you the same question you asked me earlier. So
Yeah.
how are you simulating like people at scale? Is it individual LLM calls per person, or are you sort of like doing like one mass call to capture a bunch of people, or is it something else?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's one LLM call per persona at the minute. When we generate the personas, we do it as like one prompt, and then we find that it's important that we don't duplicate the personas.
Yeah.
But yeah, like right now, we started with this as like basically ChatGPT, but to many GPTs is how we think about it. Yeah.
Any more questions? Otherwise, I have a question.
Yeah.
So there's like, what about the risks inherent in simulating these personas? Like LLMs can very convincingly say facts that are absolutely imagined.
Mm-hmm.
So I grew up in the countryside, like 3 kilometers from the next village, and there are like 3,000 people in that village. So it's like it's a very, very remote place. It's like, okay, I'm curious. I went to ChatGPT and I was like, what are the things I can do in this very remote place? And it came up with a giant list of events that it can do. Like there's a farmer's market, there's this, there's that. I'm like, I'm pretty sure something like that is happening. There's like literally nothing happening. And that was not the only instance. So I probed that about like other localized knowledge. And you were saying like, oh, it can imitate like a 27-year-old from London, but can it imitate a 20-year-old from Chandrapur, Maharashtra, in the north of India? It probably cannot. But the LLM will still convincingly like come up with things. So I was curious, how do you mitigate some of these risks?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say that humans also hallucinate. Like having around a team of 50 people, which were like all really talented people, like quite often, like on a hourly or daily basis, we would find things where it's like, oh no, like that's actually not possible to do in Facebook ads, or or like we can be mistaken about things. I would say that it's a LLMs make different mistakes than humans do. Like they hallucinate things like very confidently in a low stakes environment. Like they might lie about the events in your local village, which a human would probably not do. But then I would say on the flip side, at least right now, humans are the only ones that like lie intentionally to cause harm. So like that is at least if we don't see that with LLMs right now. Although I think people are studying that. Yeah, so I would say like actually LLM hallucinations for me are like less important to watch out for because they're usually not done with incentives in mind. And so like the stakes are usually much lower than human hallucinations or lies. So I would say that said, this is why I don't think that my tool or any of these tools really are like a good replacement for market research with humans. I think they're an excellent complement, right? So like if you can't afford to do a focus group, right, or if you're like worried about posting to your LinkedIn something that sucks and doesn't take off, then you should simulate it first, right? But as soon as you have like some actual research and as soon as you know a little bit more about your customer, you should be trying to like bake that back into the simulation that you're running in some way. So the more that you know about your customer, the better you're going to be at using those tools. And I think that is the real lesson that I've had as a prompt engineer over the past 3 or 4 years is that like all the people who do really well with prompt engineering are the people who are just actual experts in their domain, or they work with an actual domain expert in order to give the right context into the prompt for the LLM. Like some of the successful companies like Harvey, like the lawyer one, like they have like actual lawyers on staff who tell them like, no, it said this, but that's completely wrong. You should say this instead, and then that becomes an example that they train the LLM on. So I think that's not going away. Like that's still going to be super important. So you can use these tools. Like these tools are really great. Actually, I think Jonathan, you gave a good framing here. Is like if you don't know anything about your customer, like this is this is a great, great tool to use to get up to 50, 60% knowledge immediately with basically no cost, right? But if you know a ton about your customer and you're like the next Steve Jobs and you're incredibly intuitive, then you're still going to be better than these tools. But that doesn't mean that these tools aren't useful to you, because there are a lot of things that Steve Jobs wasn't sure about or didn't know about. So we can be a real domain expert in one area, but just be completely clueless in another area. So and like you can bounce between these different things. You can go and do a pilgrimage and really understand the human psyche 1 week, and then the other week you could be testing stuff in Rally.
Thanks, Michael. Are there any more questions, comments, discussions? Now it's the last 5 minutes of open discussion, so feel free to mention anything.
Yeah, I'll just add a little extra onto what Michael was saying. I think what is clear is that it's really important to get insights from people alongside simulated research. But what is so cool about simulated research as well is that there's a whole group of people that will just never engage in market research, like CEOs, CTOs. You're not going to get them to do a focus group or a survey. They're not going to sit there for $5 for 15 minutes of their time. But the amazing thing about these people is they write tons of content online. They interview in Forbes, they do podcasts, and you can take all of this information and build that into a simulation. So instead of going purely based on gut feel and guess, you can actually use a simulation, which is far better than your alternative in these cases, which is nothing. And that's one of the things like we're really excited about at Artificial Societies, is that you really can take people that are out of reach of market research currently and then bring those into focus.
You might even say, oh, sorry, I was just going to say, you might even say that simulated focus groups or panels might be more accurate than human ones, because people they're embarrassed in real life, right? Like they don't want to tell you what they really think. They're worried about the ulterior motives of the person doing the study, so or trying to impress them, right? So there's all sorts of studies about that. So I would say in some scenarios that actually might be more accurate to simulate.
I was just add to that thought, Michael, around the idea of, we've consumed 80-90% of the written content, right? And there's a lot of video being created. But what we also haven't recorded or understood yet is in video, am I telling the truth as an example? So when I'm interviewing politicians, the AI is going to start to pick up on a lot of the body language and the nuances of the words and the eye movement to see if they're truly saying something they believe in or not, right? So we're going to have a new layer of data and lenses on stuff that we're not used to, right? So we're very much living in a text world right now on AI. I think the next variation is going to have a lot more data from that type of idea, video to words. How do I say it? Did I pronounce it clearly? Did I want to pronounce it clearly? Did I look up to the left? That means I'm thinking or I'm lying, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's going to get very interesting.
Yeah, I suspect people will actually go out and specifically, like their competitive advantage will be that they will go and gather their own data to use these tools more effectively. So I was talking to a university recently about Rally, and they one of the things I suggested was like, why don't you just go and do a virtual tour of the university, take pictures of the different access points, and then put those pictures into Rally, and then ask, like, as a wheelchair user, like, would you be able to navigate from here to here, right? Like you could actually go and do that today, and it doesn't require any special technology. It just requires someone who can be bothered to get a camera and walk around the university. So like that's data that like Google might not have if they didn't do Street View, right? Like that's data that ChatGPT doesn't have. So that's one example, but I feel like that's most of what our jobs will be post AGI is going out and collecting data that doesn't exist yet.
It's a good concluding comment. I like that. Any more questions, comments?
But to your point, Paul, we talk about jobs and stuff. I think it's really important for us to remind ourselves that when you get worried about AI, it's because you're only thinking about, like you were talking about, Michael, today, replacing what we do today, right? And I always go back to the banks and stuff. If you look at a bank 10 years ago, they don't have the thousands of employees they have today doing the stuff they did 10 years ago, 20 years ago, right? So banks used to be a very simple transaction, had very simple services, and now they have, hundreds of services, more locations than ever. In a digital world, they still have more locations, more people are hired, more people doing things, right? It's the same idea. We've got to start rethinking our lens as what we know is marketing today is going to definitely shift. We're not going to keep doing the same ad strategies and the same social media strategies and stuff. We have a short window to use a lot of these tools to accelerate today's known methodologies, right? To get ahead, build a bigger audience right now. But I can tell you in 15 months, I bet you half these strategies will not work, right?
Yeah.
Because they're going to become too saturated, but something else is going to open up, right? And I think that's what's super cool. And when we think about like mobile technology, whoever would have thought about Uber, right? So Uber is the one that took advantage of the new technologies, and you'll find a lot of the early solutions are not going to be the big movers of really taking advantage of AI.
Yeah. Like my first job was in 2009, I think, in a company called Efficient Frontier, and we were very nerdy company. We at that time when we were working on Google Ads stuff, right? So I did the ads for like the iPhone launches and things like that for Car from Warehouse, and there was there were literally like a room full of 30 people who were just adjusting bids in Excel all day. Right. And then like our technology automated that. It kind of used portfolio theory. And then it became part of the Adobe platform after that. But like today, it would be criminal negligence to go and adjust bids manually for your whole account, right, across 10 million keywords. But like none of those 30 people are unemployed today. Right? Like we all got wiped out, but like instead of doing spreadsheets of bid optimization, instead we do spreadsheets of like which creatives we're going to test this week, or or like how the performance is and like what strategy is going to be next week. So I've already kind of lived through one round of automation, and I'm actually like working longer hours now than I was back then. So I'm not too worried.
Yeah, another thing that's cool about this whole sphere is it's not market contracting. Like there's not going to be less market research done because of simulations. In fact, the spheres that you can now use market research in because of simulations is growing exponentially. Like who would have run market research on a LinkedIn post before you can simulate? It would have been stupid. So yeah. I'm excited to see like how minute, how like small the decisions you can now optimize by getting feedback on are.
Super, super important comment. I feel like Adriana, my head is full, a lot to absorb. It was a really, really cool session. Thank you so much, Jonathan, for the warm-up. Thank you, Patrick, for making such a great demo and giving us so much context and really explaining it to us. And thanks, Mike, for like really showing us the nuance of the data sets and how it influenced. It was super, super interesting. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys. Good job. Good job, Paul.
Welcome to Rally, your virtual audience simulator. Rally lets you ask almost any question to entire crowds of role-playing agents, each with their own unique background context. When you prompt in Rally, your questions get answered by all of the agents within your audience at the same time. The responses are then synthesized into a helpful summary, but you can drill in to the individual responses from your personas, copy them, or you can export the entire chat to a CSV. Each session is saved, so you can return to it later and continue the thread, and the personas maintain memory within each session. This means you can ask follow-up questions, such as get an opinion scale, or even ask what these personas would need to change a prior vote. You can even ask them to give feedback on something visual like an image. The personas cannot see each other's responses, and it's by that way we avoid groupthink. And to reset memory, you just need to start a fresh session. Designing your own audience is as straightforward as adding a description and clicking generate. You can generate more than one persona at a time, tweak the audience description to align your virtual audience characteristics with that of a real audience, edit your personas, or clone via text. This lets you create audiences quickly based on text from LinkedIn profiles, autobiographies, script comment threads, reviews, transcripts. Anything that you can get into text can theoretically be used to generate personas. You can also download our CSV template and use our bulk import method, which also supports cloning. And then once you save your audience, it will be available in your hub where you can either ask questions or export so that you can import it into the account of another user that you're supporting. With that said, give us a try today and let us know what you think. Happy prompting.
Step into the simulation, a virtual audience of role-playing characters, each with a unique perspective. This is more than playful fantasy. Welcome to Rally, a private crowd feedback platform designed to offer swift, authentic insights. Within these digital personas, you can pose nearly any question. Is your marketing pitch resonating? Does your design spark delight? Here you receive direct, honest feedback, free of the echo chamber and groupthink often found elsewhere. Marketers validate campaigns before launch. Innovators refine product concepts. Entrepreneurs test prototypes across broad or niche specific digital audiences, all in a safe and private environment. Rally's simulated panel never tires and remains ready to guide you toward sharper, everyday decisions. By combining simplicity with insights from the crowd, Rally removes the barriers between your questions and your answers, all the wisdom, none of the scars.